Welcome to the Christianity Explored Leaders Podcast. My name is Tom Heisman, and I'm joined in this episode by not one, but two presenters of the Christianity Explored films, the lovely Emma Scribner and the equally lovely Efrem Buckle. Emma, it's good to see you again. And Efrem, thank you for joining us for this time. And before we begin, Efrem, just tell us a bit about yourself, maybe, a bit about your background with CE and how you ended up presenting.
I'm a leader at London City Mission, based in London, as the name suggests, and been there for over 10 years. Also a pastor, and through the work of the ministry there and connection with Rico, I was asked to join the team and become one of the presenters, which was an immense privilege.
In this episode of the podcast, we're looking at the second session of Christianity Explored and the topic of the power and the authority shown by Jesus. Here, we really want guests to be considering the question, is Jesus someone they can trust? There's a lot to consider and talk about, but before we do, here's what to expect from the films in this session.
What I find amazing about Jesus is that unlike so many throughout history, he doesn't use his authority to control, manipulate, or dominate, but to serve.
Whether we think someone leading us is a good thing will depend on what we think that person is like. Do they make us feel safe? Do they care? Do they have the power to change our lives for better or for worse?
He has this great power, but he's also using it for the very people who can't help themselves. And he sees the people who no one else spots, the weak, the ones who are at the very, very bottom, and he comes down from that great height to serve them.
So before we get into the theme of this week, session 2 is a really interesting one to lead on, because you'll have people returning with burning questions. You'll have people who won't come back but came before. You'll have people who are coming for the first time, hopefully as well. So Tom and Efrem, how do you prepare for the second week of a course like this?
I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of excitement a person's feeling as they're getting ready to facilitate this course, and with that maybe even some anxiety about the types of questions that people may be coming with. And so in terms of preparation, I would suggest the obvious things really. I think one, prayer, and just really taking time for stillness with the Lord and committing the time and the activities to the Lord. I think also just familiarizing yourself with the material as best as possible. And that's always going to help strengthen and guide as you work through the structure of the material. But then also there's that sort of unknown dimension of what kind of questions are people going to ask. Don't feel like you have to have all of the answers. The blessing is that you are hoping people will come back, and so if there are things that you need to go away and look into and come back to them with a response, or just feel free to say, you know what, I don't really have an answer to that, but we can explore together as we go through. And so just having that posture of reliance upon the Lord and confidence that this material has really been rigorously tried and tested, and it's built for questions.
And I think in that I want to encourage people, like you're saying, to trust the material. So trust the sessions and encourage your group to trust the sessions. I think as well, like when you're coming into week 2, you're just starting to gauge the nature of the group. So you're just starting to pick up on actually who amongst this group of people are likely to stick this out. Inevitably, whenever you're going to run a course like this, you're going to get people who are drop-in, drop-outs. Like they come for one session, they come back for week 6.
Well, it's hard.
It's hard, isn't it? And it's good to have them there, like it's, and you want to encourage good conversation with them. But it's those guys who are going to come for week 1 and then stick it out for the duration that I'm really interested in walking with us through. Emma, in this session's film, you talk really helpfully about when you were young, about just hating being told what to do, about rejecting authority. In this session, we're asking people to consider this idea that Jesus has authority over all of life. Why do you think people are just like inherently suspicious about anyone claiming moral or spiritual authority over things?
One thing that we always want to remember is there's going to be a range of experiences from the people who are in your group. And for some people, authority will be a good thing, but for some of them, it will be something that's very negative. Partly, I think that's because we were used to people and seeing leaders particularly who have had authority and used it in abusive ways. You know, they've made promises to us. They've said, we're going to do this, we're going to look after you, we're going to whatever, and then they've broken them. And so it's very difficult when your trust has been betrayed on a personal level, whether that's in your own life or even on a sort of a global level when you see it with world leaders, to believe a claim by someone else and their authority. So that's one of the reasons why we'll want to be looking at the kind of authority that Jesus offers and why it's different from the bad authority we've seen in other places.
Yeah, and I think that alongside as well a rampant culture of individualism and how dare anyone speak into my life? Like, it's my way, no one else's way. You don't get to say or speak into my life with any sense of authority because I'm the only one who has right authority over my life. And it's that kind of aversion to that, I think.
Absolutely.
Efrem, this session's a kind of a real whirlwind of like encounters that Jesus has with different people as we walk through these chapters in Mark's Gospel, displaying his power and authority. We see him calm the storm, we see him teach, we see him heal. He raises someone from the dead in Jairus' daughter. When you were filming this episode, what was going through your mind about the nature of Jesus' power and authority? Like, how was that for you as you reflected on that?
It was wonderful to focus on the fact that Jesus was so distinctly consistent in the use of his power and authority. I think that's one of the fears that we have, that as we see someone who seems to hold such promise, that they're just going to fall off.
Yeah.
And I guess in life, quite rightly so, because we're all flawed and fallen and so prone to that. The fact that Jesus was so consistent, and in that it wasn't just consistently powerful, but also compassionate. Those two things were held together in a way that caused me to just afresh just feel like, wow, if there were anyone that I would be encouraged to trust in, just seeing the consistency of his power, which was just so complete, but also his compassion, which was authentic.
How might that help somebody who, for those sorts of people we were talking about a moment ago, for whom authority is seen as a negative thing? How might this idea of Jesus and how he presents authority, how might that be a help for them?
We come to this wanting to know God. And by definition, it suggests that God is the ultimate authority. And so however we feel about human authority, coming to know God, we are in some ways readying ourselves to wrestle with his supreme authority. And so the fact that Jesus, in his identity, reveals God to us, and God is all-powerful. We would want God to be all-powerful. We want him to be able to fix things and sort people out and et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, the fact that he is compassionate, I think is actually counterintuitive. And I would hope it takes people by surprise.
Yeah, that's helpful.
What does somebody need to see in Jesus to feel that he is safe and that they can trust his authority?
How does he treat the least? How does he treat the people that seemingly don't matter in society? Often, people will be judged by their achievements and accolades, but exposed by the way that they treat people on the margins.
Yeah.
And so seeing that in Jesus and how he heals people who are outcasts, who other people shun in his time and in his society, but the way in which he will reach out and touch them and show a genuine depth of compassion that is even unusual in his own time, I think that's just the hallmarks of this is somebody who can be trusted, somebody who genuinely cares. He doesn't just play up for the cameras, metaphorically speaking. Yeah. He's not just when the eyes of the great and good are on him, then he shines, but actually it's in those encounters that actually there's no big audience or this person isn't notable.
And I think in that, helping people to see how does Jesus use his power, or does Jesus ever use his power for himself or for his own gains? And the answer is never. And he's serving others rather with his power, not self-serving,
yes.
Which just runs so counter to everything people would perceive in the world around us in terms of how power is used. And so I think if we can draw that out in our conversations in this study with people to help people see how is the way that Jesus uses his ultimate power different to any other form of human hold-on power, I think that's a good place we want to try and get people to. These stories about Jesus are, they're compelling, right? But they bring up difficult questions. Like we see Jesus heal, but we're thinking, well, does that mean that he heals everybody who trusts in him? We see him calm the storm and quiet it with a word, but there's so much suffering in the world through natural disasters. Maybe this is the time where we're going to get the kind of the $1 million question of, like, how can God allow this kind of stuff in the world if he is powerful like that? How do we just begin to approach questions like that, Efrem, if they come up?
My inclination is first and foremost to welcome them. As you rightly said, Tom, there's a sense in which these will often be the questions that are surfaced when people begin to wrestle with the realities of life and the realities of God. How can there be a good God and there's such bad things happening in life? And so welcoming those questions, encouraging people to see how that plays out throughout the course, and not feeling the temptation to provide quick and conclusive answers that are sort of pat and neat, but allowing just the time to sit with that question, and always being able to point back to Jesus and recognize the fact that even as Jesus encounters these incidents and issues, he's demonstrating that he is the solution. That he is the answer. The fact that he encounters those issues demonstrates that we ought not to pretend that they're not problems. He came to demonstrate that he is the one who solves the deepest problems of life. And people will begin to understand at a point that these things happen in life because of sin and the fallen nature of this world. Trying to just reel that off as an answer quickly can be somewhat meaningless in the first instance. And
disingenuous. I think sometimes people don't want like a pat answer. Like they ask the question, but what they don't want is the clean-cut soundbite of an answer. And sometimes it's the humility as a leader to be able to say, you know what, like I find this question really hard, and I kind of wrestle with that. And here's me trying to work out the answer. Like, let me take you through my kind of journey in that.
I think that's right, and as well because. When you're a Christian, it's not like all of your questions are suddenly answered. I think in many ways, Christianity is a journey, and the more you go on, the more questions you have, but they're just sort of different. And that's actually a really good thing. And as you say, not something to be afraid of.
Emma, for some, the story of Jairus' daughter specifically, I guess, is especially painful for them. It might be that it allows somebody to open up a bit about their past experience or their own grief or loss in their own lives. At this point, how do we care helpfully for somebody in that circumstance within the context of a kind of group discussion? How do we navigate what is potentially quite a complex conversation?
This is something that I think is very important, and it will come up, but in many ways that's a great thing. Christianity Explored is allowing people not to just come and make small talk, but to deal with big questions, big emotions, things that you're scared of talking about in normal everyday life, and that we're saying, no, there's no topic off limits here. And so a big thing, I guess, is not to be scared by the depth of someone's emotion on whatever issue it is, and to recognise as well that the Bible and Mark's Gospel speaks to all human experience, and in many ways that will be shared. So there are some ways in which, for example, with Jairus' daughter, people will experience maybe the loss of someone that they love, and we share that. What we want to do is we want to be praying the whole way through. We want to listen and allow people to speak honestly about how they feel, without making judgments about that. And then it might be something you can pick up later on a one-to-one or another time.
And I think that's a helpful point, isn't it? That it's what we're saying when we're running a group like this or a course like this is this isn't necessarily the only time we're going to engage with these people, and we prayerfully hope that it won't be. And whether it's us or one of the other leaders or someone else in the church, just to give them opportunity to continue this conversation beyond this 1 hour that you've got together on a Tuesday night is actually really important.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that might be helpful, especially if somebody has a real strength of feeling that there's a sense in which the conversation maybe triggers a sense of grief and bereavement, to actually interrupt the structure and pray. And pray for them and for everyone who's experienced loss. And even in that prayer, be able to give thanks for the fact that Jesus does offer hope and comfort in that regard, which is why he came. In that way, that person can feel heard and seen. That sense of prayer can offer even a sense of closure to that point that allows you to move on, whilst at the same time not causing the person to feel dismissed.
Now, we're talking about the power and authority of Jesus, but we have seen time and time again those in positions of power in the church have not reflected his ways. So how should we respond if someone brings up Christian leaders or churches that have behaved badly or that fail us morally?
There can be a temptation in the first instance to feel defensive and feel like we need to defend the name of the church and the honour of the Lord. I would definitely suggest erring on the side of just honesty and a recognition that unfortunately these things have happened and they are inexcusable, and a person's position or title or authority doesn't justify it. I think pointing back to Jesus and the fact that he himself called out wrong and especially abuses of power. Jesus understands that these things happen and he doesn't co-sign them.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't excuse them or just brush them under the carpet. Being able to communicate that can cause a person to feel as though they're not trying to convince us that these things were wrong. And that we all understand that these things are wrong. From there, being able to, again, point to the fact that Jesus confidently and boldly called these things out because he was not guilty of them.
Yeah.
And if anything, as we get through the story, we'll see that he himself was subject to abuse. The abuse of power and, treachery and injustice. And he took that for us. And even in our place, so that we could have that confidence that he's conquered that on our behalf.
Mark doesn't shy away from the supernatural aspects of Jesus' ministry. Last week, guests will have heard about the baptism of Jesus with God the Father speaking and the Spirit descending like a dove. And in this session, we're looking at Jesus' control over sickness, over nature, over death, and also over evil spirits. Now, for so many, this concept is so far from their life experience that they might not know what to make of it. And as leaders, that might also be the case. And so we spoke to Dr. Israel Olofinjana, who is the director of One People Commission for the Evangelical Alliance, just about how we begin to understand for ourselves and respond wisely when guests ask about demons and evil spirits.
I think there is a fascination in our world with the supernatural, with the spiritual world. In fact, one could argue that where we are now is post-secular. And what that simply means is that we have religious, spiritual ideas coexisting alongside the idea of liberal democracy in that sense. People are out there seeking spirituality. People are out there seeking something. And so what we need to be aware of is what are the background in which people are coming to this subject of the demonic and evil spirit. Are they coming because they are curious? Are they coming because they are concerned? Are they coming because they are confused? These are things that we need to be aware of as we lead people in this particular session. So you as a leader, you need to be very pastoral and gentle as you begin to land this particular subject to just gauge. And I think once we begin to approach it from that pastoral angle, it helps people to settle in. whether they come in because they're confused, whether they come in because they have fear, or whether they come in because they are curious about the supernatural. One of the fantastic things about Mark's gospel is that it's asking a critical question. Who is this person, Jesus? And the way Mark helps us to enter into that story is to help us to understand that Jesus is the Son of God, is the Messiah who was baptized through John the Baptist. Jesus has power over the demonic. That this Jesus has power over evil spirits. And so we see Jesus casting out demons in Mark's gospel from the very beginning, and you see it right through Mark's gospel. Jesus praying for the sick to be healed, praying for unclean spirits to be casted out in different ways. It's very important to help them to understand what the Bible actually says about this subject, because that's very key doctrinally and theologically. And the important thing to note from Mark's gospel is that, yes, evil spirit exists, the demonic does exist, but Jesus has power over them. And Jesus was able to drive them out through his authority. Then I think you just want to help to caution, because there are different extremes. One extreme is to see the demonic in everything. So every illness is demonic. Every cough, every stumbling is demonic. I think that's not a healthy extreme. We don't want people to live like that. We must understand that the way our body is in this fallen world, we still fall sick. If we overworked ourselves, we get burnt out, we're going to get exhausted. The second extreme is to dismiss the supernatural world and the demonic and evil spirit. And this is more so within the Western context, where because of rationality, enlightenment, worldview, we dismiss the demonic world. So I hope these 3 points have been very helpful: the pastoral, the theological, and then the caution.
That's nearly all we have time for today. But before we finish, Efrem and Emma, one last question for you. If you were running this session, say you were doing this tomorrow night, what would be the one thing that you would want your table to go home thinking about off the back of this session?
Yeah, the one thing. I think the completeness of Jesus' power and the depth of his compassion, and how those two things are just so distinct and so needed in our lives, and thankfully are clearly presented as being that which Jesus is and offers to us.
Great. Emma, what about you?
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think a big thing is you can come with whatever questions and expectations that you have, but let Jesus speak for himself. So as you open up the pages, just, take the time to see yourself. Does he walk the walk? Is he who he says he is? And give him time to speak, because he will, and I think just make up your mind for yourself. Don't be swayed by what you think Christianity is about, or what you think you've heard or rejected or whatever in the past. But turn these pages and ask all the questions you want, because I think Jesus is lovely, and he can stand up for himself.
Yeah, that's really good. And I want people going away with a kind of unanswered question that makes them want to come back next time. So thinking, hey, this is an authority I've never seen before. What's he going to do with it? And then, okay, maybe I'll come back and find out. A big thanks to Emma and to Efrem and to Dr. Israel Olofinjana. As you go into your second session, be praying for each of your guests and keep praying through the week. Encourage them to be reading Mark's Gospel for themselves. The Christianity Explored app also contains a full audio version of Mark's Gospel featuring Emma and Efrem and Rico. There's lots of support available for you. Head to our leaders portal, lead.christianityexplored.org, where you will find a whole load more resources for leaders. And please do keep in touch with the Christianity Explored team as you run your course. We would love to support you and hear how things are going as you walk alongside people exploring the claims of Jesus Christ. Thanks for watching this episode. We'll see you again next time.